Hi everyone, I'm Mike Holton, and today we are going to be unboxing and setting up the brand new RECORD POWER Sabre 300 12-inch bandsaw. Although this is only a 12-inch bandsaw, when we start talking about the specifications later on, you're going to be able to compare it to much larger and more expensive machines. Right, I'm going to start unboxing everything here. We'll get it all out and then we'll start assembly. Okay, this is quite a heavy machine, so I'm not going to try and lift it out of the box as is. I'm going to tip the box onto the side and then disassemble the box round it. I've built a sledge for it to roll around on to make it easier to move, and if I can, I'm going to leave the body of the machine on the sledge. Okay, she's out of the box. I'm going to spend a couple of moments familiarising myself with the instructions, and then we'll put it together. Okay, as with any flat pack assembly, it's important to be able to identify all the parts that you're trying to put together. Page 7 of the instructions takes you through the main 6 parts of the body. Okay, the first part of the assembly is to identify the base, which is this. Now, it's very important at the start to make a note of which is the front and which is the back. There's a very clear diagram in here to show you exactly which is which. The side with just 2 holes on, so we've got 3 there, 3 there and 3 there, and this side just 2, that is the front. The first part of the assembly is to put the handle on the door. Now the door part is the only one with the hole on the front. So we take our handle, unscrew the bolt, push that through, and attach the bolt to the back. Okay, now this is quite fiddly, but the best way I've found is if you just put your finger on the top of the bolt, push it over the top of the hole, and then locate the screw thread on the other side. Now we'll be able to get finger tight, and then we'll be able to nick that up later on with an Allen key. Okay. Step 1 done. Okay, next part is adding the left hand side panel, and these are attached with the M6 12mm bolts. When we're putting this together, we're not going to tighten anything up until right at the very end. So just finger tight is fine for now. Right, next is the right-hand side panel. This is the panel that we put the handle on. I thought it was a door, but it was obviously just the locking mechanism for the door. And we're going to attach this in the same way as we did the other side with 2 M6 12mm bolts. Remember to have that handle to the front of the base. Okay, now it's time for the back panel. And to identify the back panel, it's the one with 3 holes on one side. We're using the side with 2 holes, and they're going to go into those again with the M12 nuts. Okay, the next step is to add 4 more bolts across the centre, and these are going to act as placement areas for the shelf. Don't screw them all the way in. Just a couple of turns just to keep them in place. Okay, the shelf is a tight fit, so the best way to do it is to put it in at a right angle and then push it down until the side parts are over the bolt. On the shelf there, you'll notice that there's two protruding parts. These are to be at the front, obviously to make room for the door. Next part is to put the hinge on for our door. This is done with two M6 16mm socket heads. Tighten those up in a second. On the base, another M6 with a washer on the base. Okay, we've got one side piece left, and this is the door, identifiable by just one hole on the side. With that hole, you'll find in the pack a nut and washer, a nut and bolt with the sleeve on. The sleeve and the nut, sorry, the sleeve of the bolt go on one side, and the nut goes on the inside. Okay, we're just going to test fit the door before we tighten everything up. You notice in the door we've got holes on the top and the bottom. These literally, just turn it around a bit so you can see, sit directly onto those two nuts. And to close the door, there's a wonderful little locking mechanism on here that just goes in and twists and locks. That is genius. Right, I'm going to nip up all the nuts and bolts to make this sturdy, and then we'll attach it to the top. Okay, I've laid the bandsaw back down again so we can attach the base, and I've put a couple of pieces of wood underneath just to make sliding this up that little bit easier. The door goes to the front of the machine. Yeah, we'll push it up to it. Now, we're not going to push it all the way in yet. The best way to do this is, because these are quite long bolts we're putting through, we push it through the top hole, and then we can easily locate it where it needs to be underneath. I'll do the same for the bottom two as well. Okay, we're going to fit the table top now. This is a wonderfully heavy piece of cast steel, and it comes generously coated in an oil to stop it from rusting. So I'm just going to clean that off before we attach it to the base. I'm just going to use a normal easing oil. WD-40 will do absolutely fine. There we go. Now, before we put this on the base, we've got to make sure that this slot is in line with the one in the base, just so when we ease it on over the blade, it doesn't get caught and we have to take it back off again. Okay, just quickly turn this over to show you the base. There's 4 fixing holes we have there. That's for a calibration nut, which we'll be putting on in a little while. This is held in place by 4 of these nuts, and they have a spring washer over the top and then a normal washer, and then it's screwed through the base and into this. Okay, it's best to put the table base on from the back. I'll just rest it in place there, and we'll do the final alignment from underneath. I'm only put those in finger tight for now, because I need to turn this bed to 45 degrees so I can get the nuts in the other side. Okay, that's all in position, but before we can tighten it up, we need to check that the blade is square to the table. We're just going to use a straight edge, make sure it's nice and square sitting on the blade. And then we're going to measure across to the inset. Okay, got the same distance on each side now, so I'm going to tighten up those nuts and we can move on. Once I've tightened it up, and I'll check it again just to make sure it hasn't moved during the tightening process. Okay, we've now set these runners square to the blade, but we need to now set that this blade we can always return to 90 degrees of the table itself. To do that, first of all, we've got to put that little nut on the base that I showed you earlier on. Okay, this is the stop bolt and nut, and this just screws into the table like so. The idea is when it's brought down, it'll rest on here, and we're going to calibrate it by adjusting this to get the table at 90 degrees to the blade. This little guy here, we can move out of the way so the stop block will go beyond it, just in case you ever want to cut angles beyond that 90 degrees. Now, just using the spanner provided in the kit, I'm just going to start winding this in. Perfect. Right, there's no daylight getting through that at all, so I can just tighten up the locking nut, and that will lock that off. Okay, so just by simply screwing that nut in or out, you can bring the base perfectly at right angles to the blade. The final part of the calibration is just to slacken off this nut here. We can reposition. And now we can reset it to any angle we want and be fairly certain that it's going to be pretty accurate. Okay, we're doing well. Now's the time to start fitting the rip fence. I'm going to take off a nut, of course that happened, and a washer from each side. So slot it through the two holes. And then put the nut and the washer back on the other side. This is a solid piece of steel, so do be prepared for the weight. That's all the calibration and squaring we need to do on there. So just make sure everything is nice and tight, but we would check it periodically just in case anything moves. Okay, the next part of the procedure is to fit the aluminium face mount. Just take that screw back, just make sure it's clear all the way through, and just slide it onto the rip fence. Okay, we've got two locks in here. One's the main one, and this one is for fine adjustments. So the next thing is to fit the fence. Okay, so to fit the fence, I'm just going to slide it into the guide rail, like that. And yes, you guessed it, we've got to calibrate it. Okay, I've just positioned the fence along the T-channel. And by altering the screws on the fence mount, you'll see you're starting to bring that back parallel If you run your finger along it, hopefully you won't feel any difference. There we go, nice and square. Now the fence itself can be moved to the other side if you wanted to keep it this side of the blade, and it can also be turned on its side as well, but we're going to cover those in future videos. Okay, I'm going to start adding attachments now, as we're going to need them when I carry on with the calibration. Okay, when it comes to calibrating the guide assembly, it's not as difficult as it looks. First of all, this handle on the back, when loosened, allows this whole unit to be moved forward and backwards. The screws on the sides and on the front control the guides inside. There's two on either side of the blade and one behind. And the idea for the side ones is to get them as close as you can to the blade without touching, and the guide itself has to be behind the leading edge of the blade. The rear guide has to be again as close as you can get it to the blade, but again without touching. Now you have to allow for a little bit of deflection, so just make sure it's clear but as close as you can get it. There are two sets of guides on this bandsaw, one above the blade and there's one below. And the operation for both is just the same. So there we go. We're all put together. I'll just quickly take you through the basic operations of the bandsaw, and then we'll start talking about the features and put it through its paces in part 2. On the back of the machine, we have the cam tension lever. This is put to this position for changing the blade. Here we have the tracking knob. Release the tension, and then you can track the blade forward or backwards. Ideally, the blade is always running on the middle of the wheel. Here we have a lever to raise and lower the arm. There are a full scale of depths on the side of the arm, and always remember you only want this as high as the piece you're working on. If you're working on an each piece, do not have the arm all the way to the top. When you've got the right position, you can lock it in position there. We have a very, very simple locking mechanism on all the doors. There's a safety switch, so this machine cannot be operated when the door is open. Same for the bottom. Okay, in terms of turning on and off, just the usual green and red buttons that you would expect. Safety feature here, if the machine is in operation when there's a power cut, when the power comes back on, it will not restart itself. Okay, as I mentioned, we're going to talk through the specification of this machine in the next video, and we're going to put it through its paces as well and see what it's capable of. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. But apart from that, thank you very much indeed for watching, and I'll see you in part 2. Thank you.